you you don't necessarily need to be the low bid to win. You know, if someone is being bid something that's $30,000 and customer A bids or contractor A bids 30 grand and contractor B bids 33 grand, you know, that $3,000 difference to a homeowner already spending that much is not going to be what differentiates one contractor from the other. So, you know, being able to go to site and have a portfolio and say, look, you know, I really focus on good looking solar arrays, you know, arrays that are uniform in appearance and aesthetic in appearance and symmetrical and kind of naturally follow the roof surface. And whatever roof surface you're using in an efficient manner, but also in a aesthetic manner that looks good. You know, if the array isn't covering up the whole roof, you know, making sure that you're getting it centered on the rooftop. You know, if we're not covering the whole roof, making sure the array is symmetrical instead of just kind of covering whatever section of the roof is, you know, is there. You know, so making sure that this array is, you know, right in the center where it looks good instead of something that's peculiar or odd. So nice, even roof surfaces, and focusing on good looking arrays to say like, look, you know, anyone can put solar on your rooftop. When we do it, it's going to look good. And then also doing enough planning so that you're not just standing up on the roof not knowing what to do. You know, getting your project crew and design and project organization to the point where when you're up on the roof, you're installing, and when you're done, you get off of it. And you're not having to spend unnecessary time on the roof figuring it out. Every single minute that you're walking around on a roof, it's bad for the roof. Rooftops are not meant to have construction crews walking around on them. And so if you bring up, you know, in the sale, you know, some things that your company is aware of that other installers aren't necessarily talking about, like the array aesthetics, making it look good, you know, not damaging their roof by spending a lot of unnecessary time on the roof. Those are things that are important. Talk about some of the finer installation techniques a little bit later today to make the aesthetics really look well. Thing that is very important. You need to pay very close attention to this. Solar panels have a false impression of strength. You know, solar panels with a big frame you can throw into the back of your trip pickup truck and drive down the road in them, have them be bouncing up and down, and at the end of your stop, get back out, pull the panels up, and they're just fine. So solar panels are strong. You know, they're designed to have 1-inch hail at 50 miles an hour ping off of them. But they're not perfect. And that's the danger, is that the solar panels seem so strong that you think they're stronger than they are. So I've done a utility scale project where people are building the utility scale ground mount. And so the post comes out of the ground. Here's the ground right here. And the solar array, you know, is kind of on the pile. And, you know, here's our rack. And then the solar panels come on the rack. And once that goes up and you have a whole field of panels, you know, a worker who's not going to last long on the project might take a break by sitting on the solar panel, you know, right around here. Back in the day, 10 years ago, solar installers thought they could walk on solar panels because, you know, I'm a pretty heavy guy. I would not think that I could walk on a solar panel, but, you know, if you weigh 160 pounds, you know, you can walk right across the surface of a solar panel and not see any damage. Let me pull up. There's a really good YouTube video. Let me pull it up and show it to you. Because what happens is the module frame is very strong. The module glass is relatively strong. The cells of solar are not strong. The silicon itself, the cell itself, is very brittle, as you can see. If you flex it enough, it completely shatters. All right. That same kind of approach where you're flexing the cell and the cell shatters, you can't see it with the naked eye. But if you kneel on a panel, if you walk on a panel, you can see these little fractures occurring in some of the cells here. You can see the stress placed on these cells. And so if you're walking on the cell, you know, he's jumping up and down on the cell, that might not be enough to damage the glass. And then you get off of the panel, and unless you're scanning the array with these like infrared cameras or equivalent, you won't see any damage. The solar panel will look just like, you know, a regular solar panel. But the problem is those little micro cracks that you exacerbate by kneeling on the panel or elbowing the panel right in the middle of it. So, you know, right in the middle of the solar panel, if you're leaning or kneeling, because, you know, there's clips right here. And so you may be down here at the bottom of the array, and you may need to lean over to hit that module clip with your impact driver and screw it down onto the rack. And so you might take your elbow or your knee and knee right in the middle of the panel. Now that's not good. You know, what is also very common is these solar panels will come in pallets. So you got a big box of solar panels, and sometimes they just come shrink wrapped, and they don't even come in a box. They just come stacked up on top of each other. And so here's a big old pallet container of solar panels, and the mistake is to go and put something heavy on top of them. You know, maybe it's for storage, maybe it's for shipping, or maybe you just have a really heavy piece of equipment and it needs to go somewhere, and you think, well, this is a box of panels, I'm just going to put the box right on top of it. It won't shatter the glass, but it will cause little micro fractures in the cell that can lead to premature module failure. And so how you safely navigate an array, if you have to reach over a solar array and kind of use the weight of the solar panel itself as a point, if you have let's say you're doing solar maintenance and the array is already built, and so here's your array and you can't get up here, and so you're down here, but you have to lean over to get that clip. The way you do that is make sure you keep your weight on the module frame itself. Don't put your weight on the middle of the array. Put your weight on the frame itself, preferably where that clip is, where the rail goes underneath. So put your weight where it's structurally appropriate to put your weight, and not just in the interior of the panel. The problem with that is, if you put your weight in the interior of the panel, you might not realize you're damaging the panel. You might fire up the system and the system's working perfectly good, and that little hairline fracture inside that cell that you've put there might not become apparent for 10 or 15 years down the road. You'd have to zoom in on that little microfracture and get down to the subatomic level. But what happens is you're making a little bit of an electrical short along that line. And these electrons that would normally be flowing through are now jumping across a little fracture, jumping across a little gap. That would be in an electrical wire. That would be a fault. What it happens at the microscopic level is these electrons that are sparking across this little microfracture start to make the fracture wider and wider and wider. It starts to degrade the cells. So eventually you get little lines appearing in your solar panel that may or may not impact the solar array performance if they're particularly small. The electrons can go elsewhere. They don't have to flow directly across that microfracture in most cases. So a small amount of microfracturing is inherent to the install. In most cases, it's not a big deal, but in extreme cases, it is. And so you'll be working with solar panels every single day and, slamming them on the truck and slamming them on the ladder and slamming them on the rail. Well, when you're doing all that, that is what the module frame is for. All the structural element of the solar panel is in that frame. And so if you're pushing solar panels up a ladder, if you're unloading panels off of a pallet, if you're sliding panels into a truck, you want to make sure that if you're sliding the panel across anything, that you're only contacting the module frame and not the module glass, and certainly not putting any weight on the panels. It's very, very common to buy a pallet of solar panels and then the shipper doesn't realize that they can't put anything on top of the pallet. And if the shipper puts your inverter on top of the pallet of panels and the panels don't come in a box, that weight bouncing up and down on the panels in shipment can be enough to break the panels. And yet, sorry, I got rid of my roof here. Didn't mean to do that. And yet, even on flat rooftops, the standard solar design will give a very slight tilt to the solar panel. And that will minimize the inner row spacing so that you can still fit a bunch of solar panels on the rooftop. And they'll just give it a very slight tilt in these commercial racking systems. And the reason is rainwater. You cannot, you shouldn't drink rainwater. Should not capture it from the sky into a jug and give it a good swig. The reason is there's dirt, air pollution from the air. That rain droplet is collecting dust from the air and sticking it into the rain. And when it lands, If your solar array is perfectly flat, that water will stay on the solar panel. And there's two things that are bad for that. The worst thing is that the water will evaporate, but the dust and grime and dirt will remain on the panel. So if you give your array just a slight tilt, that rainwater is going to drain off the panel. And so you're not going to have as much dirt. You still get some dirt. This module lip from the frame is going to capture some dirt and grime. So you do get a little bit of dirt and grime here, and eventually you're going to have to clean the solar panel that way. But the short of it is you can save yourself some cleaning time by not going with a perfectly flat solar array. And so most commercial solar arrays on flat roofs do have a small tilt angle in order for it to work. The second thing is this frame lip, it's not perfect. I mean, it's great, it's sealed up, it's good, but if you get enough standing water for enough years, you know, on a hot summer day, this metal is expanding and contracting due to thermal expansion. If you get water on that surface of that panel, eventually the water is going to work its way in. And so just having standing water on top of a solar panel is not preferable. And so you do give your modules a slight tilt.